Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. I hope you are doing well and I hope you had a great weekend. We are continuing our discussion of Chapter 17, Nations and Empires, and we don't have a new heading today because we didn't get through the first one last time. So you can continue in your notes right where you left off. And when you send me a picture or, in your email, you can just show me this part that we're doing today if you would like. Or you can resend the whole thing, that's up to you. All right, so we are still on the same section of notes, nation building in the Americas. That should be an S there. And actually, let me play with the feature here. I think you can actually add stuff to this. Look at that. God is good. All right, so we had been talking about imperialism and the consolidation of empires, how countries that were super wealthy like Great Britain and France and Spain and Portugal began to set up overseas colonies. And the goal of this was to make a bunch of money. Initially, they wanted to discover gold or silver, and then the New World, that really didn't happen very much. The Spanish did discover silver in South America, but that really wasn't true for England or France. And so initially the goal was to find gold and silver. When that didn't happen, then they wanted to exploit their colonies for whatever raw materials they had available. And typically the French engaged in the fur trade. They would trade weapons and alcohol for Indian furs, which were really popular in Europe. Okay, so we talked about how the British controlled the 13 colonies, and then during the American Revolution, the 13 colonies broke away. And then, of course, during the Civil War, territorial expansion, and the war led to the end of slavery. And then the United States begins to rise as a dominant world power. So Canada. The British controlled Canada as well. Before the French and Indian War, France also controlled part of Canada. After the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, France was forced to give up its claims to North America. All right, so unlike in the United States, Canada actually separated from the British Empire peacefully in 1867. Keeping in mind, like 100 years before this, the 13 colonies had to fight a pretty serious war in order to break away from the British Empire. So, even though the French no longer had territorial claims in Canada, there were still French speakers living in Canada. And there was a lot of division between people who spoke English and people who spoke French. And so the government, kind of in the same way that the United States used this idea of manifest destiny to unify the people and to push westward, the Canadian government did the same thing. In order to promote unity between the French speakers and the English speakers, the government promoted the same idea of expansion. Let's fill out the rest of the continent, from east to west, all the way to, where Alaska is now. So Canada had a strong state, but a weak nation. So what does that mean? In terms of having a strong state, that simply means that they had solid legal institutions, their government was stable, politically, economically, socially. They were a stable nation. They used treaties, they used diplomacy to reduce any type of conflict with the Great Plains Indians living within Canada. They used government resources. We just said that they were all about territorial expansion. The government funded that, and they used state resources to promote settlement in the West. But they were not a strong nation. And think of nation in terms of nationalism. Because there was such a large group of English speakers and a large group of French speakers, nationally it was hard to unify them because you have two major, divisions between language, between religion. The French tend to be Catholic, the English tended to be Protestant, And so they did have like a strong government, but the nation itself, in terms of national unity, was not strong. All right, so moving further south in the Americas to Latin America, by the middle of the century, so like by 1850, Latin American countries had become increasingly liberal, not liberal in the way that we think of it today, but liberal in terms of Enlightenment ideas. So granting equality under the law, allowing people to vote, having a capitalist economy. In that sense, most Latin American countries were liberal capitalist societies by 1850. And like Canada and like the United States, they too sought territorial expansion. So looking specifically at Brazil, so in terms of expansion and economic development in Brazil, it was mostly the landed elites, like the aristocrat type, that kept control of the property and the Brazilian government. And so obviously, if you have these wealthy landowners who are in charge of the government, they are going to write laws that preserve their property rights. And even, after abolishing slavery, they're going to hold on to the considerable amount of property that they have. And so this ultimately shapes their policy of territorial expansion. In fact, the Brazilian state was so careful to not grant universal manhood suffrage because they wanted to hold on to their power in the government. The landed elites did. So they placed restrictions on who could vote. All right, so capitalists were granted land to extract rubber from the Amazon River basin. And so the state or the government allotted a huge amount of money to capitalists and lessened restrictions for capitalists to move into the Amazon River basin so that they could extract rubber latex. There was a lot of money to be made in that industry. And so rubber merchants, landowners made huge fortunes doing this. The workers, who were mostly Indians, they actually also benefited. As long as rubber prices remained high, they wound up getting paid pretty well. And so that was good. By the turn of the century, though, by the time 1900 comes around, this rubber enterprise in Brazil begins to decline because of international competition. So there are other nations who are also partaking in the rubber industry. All right, so nation states in Europe. So during the second half of the century, this would be like 1850 to 1900, for the most part in Europe, liberals and conservatives were in alliance. This idea of nationalism assumed a more conservative character, meaning it wasn't radical like the French Revolution was. And so nationalism actually became a way of quelling social conflict and mobilizing the state. And so leaders pushed this idea of nationalism to quell rebellions, to create unity, and to bring about stability in society. Conservatives, again, conservatives and liberals, not the same thing that this means today. In short, conservatives would have been in favor of monarchies. Liberals would have been in favor of representative governments. And so Europe kind of did like a compromise where, they would have like a constitutional monarch. And so there would still be a king, but he would be accountable to a constitution. And then in addition to the king, there would be some type of representative government, like a parliament or a congress, or in France, the Estates General. And so conservatives living in these European nations began to reconcile themselves to liberal agendas, just meaning that they gave in to many liberal demands, like granting people the right to vote. And in the same way, liberals worked with conservatives to oppose radical reform. Radical reform being like what happened during the French Revolution. All right, so Otto von Bismarck, who was the Prime Minister of Prussia, engineered, another typo. Let me fix that for us. I'm just really enjoying this editing feature. That does not look very good. That's okay. So Otto von Bismarck engineered German unification using war and realpolitik. First off, Germany wasn't a unified state. It was a bunch of states that were more like a confederation than an actual nation, like a powerful nation. And so Bismarck wanted Germany to be, or Prussia, to be a powerful nation. And so he actually engineered 3 wars, made it look like he did not cause them, won them, and then moved forward with German unification. This guy was an amazing politician. Ruthless, very much so, but a great politician. He also used this concept of realpolitik. I don't know if you have read or if you've heard of Machiavelli's The Prince, but this is simply the end justifies the means. And so it doesn't really matter what you do to achieve your goal if the goal is worthy. And so Bismarck perceived that German unification was a worthy goal. And so to him, it didn't matter what he had to do to achieve that, whether it was engineering these wars or, cheating people or making them believe something that was not true. That was fine with him as long as he achieved this goal. Okay, so nationalism in Austria-Hungary. This is not good in Austria-Hungary because there were about 20 different ethnicities represented in this empire. So think about that. If you have a nationalist movement and you have Serbians and you have all these different groups of people who experience nationalism, it makes them not want to be a part of Austria-Hungary. It makes them want their own nation. So this actually threatens to destroy the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And side note, this will be the spark that causes World War I. Is, you have the Austrian Archduke visiting Sarajevo to try to get people on board with being a part of the empire. And then a Serbian nationalist who hates the empire kills the Archduke and his wife. And it's a statement that we want our own country. We don't want to be a part of your empire. France is also weakened during this time for a different reason. This one is actually a result of one of Bismarck's wars. So one of the wars that Bismarck starts was the Franco-Prussian War. And interestingly, France went into this war thinking, yeah, this is a great opportunity for us to show off how great our military is. And then Otto von Bismarck, in Germany, end up defeating France in like 7 or 8 weeks. And so that did not go as well as France had hoped. Let's see, and then rising anti-German nationalism. So because Bismarck started this war and then France lost it, the French people began to hate Germany. And this would be another contributing factor to the world wars. Interestingly, when Germany wins the Franco-Prussian War, Otto von Bismarck goes into Versailles and proclaims the German Empire in Versailles' famous Hall of Mirrors and forced France to pay reparations for a war that he started. And so this is why at the end of World War I, France wanted Germany to pay. This is why. All right, so in the Great British Isles, because there were different groups of people living in Great Britain as well, they wanted the people to be on board with being a part of the British Empire. And one of the ways that they did that is that they gave political rights to all men and women. That made the people happy, sort of. Also, Queen Victoria's reign, she was all about promoting this idea of nationalism in order to achieve unity. And so Queen Victoria is kind of an icon of Great Britain, and she was hoping to make, the Irish people especially feel happy about being a part of the British Empire. Unfortunately, that did not work so well, especially after the Irish potato famine of the 1840s. After that, the Irish would begin to push for autonomy or home rule after this famine. All right, that is all for today. I hope you have a great day, and don't forget to email me a copy of your notes.